Hello, this is Silas. I'm here with my friend Steven. You can say hello to people.
Hello, everyone. Hope you're all doing well today.
I'm just trying out how to do these starts of these things. I'm just working out different ways. So today we're going to be having another one of our discussions in the various conversation series that we've had. And in this one, we are talking about the book Marry Him, The Case for Settling for Mr. Good Enough by Lori Gottlieb. And Steven, tell us a bit about this book and this series and what we're doing with this.
Sure. So, mentioned in the last few videos, I won't restate the whole thing here, but basically, the book is making the case that if you're having trouble meeting the right person, it may be because not that your standards are too high per se, but that you're prioritizing a lot of the wrong things and not looking at a lot of the right things. And it's worth re examining do your priorities need recalibration? And the book is a combination of speaking from her own experience, but she's also citing different experts, marriage experts, relationship experts, dating coaches, matchmakers. There's a behavioral economist, all sorts of people. So very well documented, very well researched. And I like how she tied in her personal life, but also the science behind it too.
Yeah. So with this book, one thing we've thought of, this is some of the concepts and things that Stephen and I had talked about previously or heard about in like the manosphere, which is online. It's like MGTOW, and there's certain groups like that which are more focused on the male's point of view about certain things. And for some time, people have been looking at those things. Sorry, these people hate women. They're just talking about these things, just like, oh, what kind of woman hurt you? Or you have mothers, you have sisters. What if someone was saying this about you? There's some general things about behavioral psychology, human behavioral psychology. Certain things like evo psych, like Steven said, that's bringing in the science here, where we understand we are a sexually dimorphic species. If everything was good for the goose that was good for the gander, we'd all be geese. But we're not. We're kind of separate. So some things work and some things don't work for others. But with this book, Lori Gottlieb takes some things from her background. And our kind of thought with this was, hey, it's good to see somebody else talking about these things, especially somebody who's female. We're not biologists, but I think she actually identifies as a woman as well. So to get it from that point of view, yes, some people might say she's a self-hating person, but it's a good with this book, at least so far from what I've seen. She talks about the way she saw things back in her 20s and her early 30s. And I think she wrote this book primarily about her experience around mid 30s. Is that correct?
Yeah. Well, to add to your point, she doesn't just identify as a woman. She's actually carried a child and given birth. So we know that's
Yeah,
indisputably true.
she's a birther. She's one of those
Yeah.
birthing humans
Yeah.
with a womb possessing humans. I don't know how. I
I've
don't
heard
know.
birthing person a lot. Yeah.
Okay, yes.
Yeah.
So that's it. So she talks about that and her experience with this thing, just dating and things like this. And with our experience, we're thinking this is content for specifically targeted towards if you're a female and you don't mind us having this manversation about this, and you're interested in actually getting with someone to have a relationship that's going to lead to actual marriage, some kind of monogamous. I think his focus is mostly on monogamy with
Yep.
the intention to have kids and have that kind of nuclear type of family. This is very good content for you. Now, that's not the only sort of relationship that people can have. I think anything should be open if it's willing adults. If you want to have polyamory, if you want to have just serial monogamy and all these things, you can do that. But I think the good thing to do is to have the knowledge. What do you want as a person? What do you want from somebody else? And also, on top of that, also what would that person you would want from someone, so you can kind of see if you fit those things and you can get in kind of accurate type of thing. Just there's limited time for all of us, but whether it's your biological clock, but just limited time in general, just 24 hours in a day, 7 days a week, time goes. So you want to be able to focus your energy in the best way possible if there's something that you think is valuable and you think you can actually achieve. So I think with this book, if you're interested in that, that's good. Now, I think also if you're a man out there, if you're male or not, and you're trying to kind of navigate in this the current dating meta, I think it's good to see this stuff because you hear some things, some advice from certain locations and some very loud people that I think are a minority, and it might make you seem like it's just hopeless. There's no reason to actually be out there. But I think if you actually get a book like this and you hear the things like Dr. Lori Gottlieb is saying, you can kind of maybe empathize with what some women are going through because she's explaining how she's relatively intelligent, relatively personable, at least from what she's experienced in her book. She doesn't seem to be some kind of odd, like 1%
If you
type
watch
of
videos
person.
of her, she's very smiley and upbeat too, I would say.
Yeah.
Like she looks like a happy, friendly person. Yeah.
So there's that. So she seems like a normal human being, yet she's experiencing and talking about how she's seen certain messaging that has influenced the way she approached relationships, and she finds that was not good. So I think by seeing her experience in this, maybe you could relate to some of the people you might meet and realize like, oh, they might have some underlying similar intent that you do, but just like you've gotten certain messaging about what toxic masculinity or what a man is in the current meta, they've had different messaging about what a strong, independent woman is, or what it means to be female in the current meta. So those are things that I think are good. Just knowledge is power in this situation. It's just a lot of good information. Yeah.
Yeah, so I would add too. What's interesting is I was actually reading this book before I started seeing the woman I'm currently dating, and I think in the long run it's helped me a lot too. Because as you say, the book is geared towards women, but I think there's a lot of good general advice in here, and it's good to sort of re-examine your own priorities. And one of the takeaways I really got from this book is that it's sort of meant to sort of dissuade people from this whole fairy tale idea of what relationships are and sort of deal with the real reality. Like, don't get me wrong, it's not to say you can't be with someone you love, you can't have fun, all this, but it's not like people expect the Disney fairy tale to be a real life situation, and this is not how things are. And I think many people, women especially, have sort of been misled into that, and that's why they're complaining these relationships aren't good. Because then when the reality doesn't pan out with that expectation, it's oh well, he's not good enough. There's someone better. When in reality, this is just what reality is. It's just you've been misled into thinking this is things go work differently. Yeah.
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 Yeah, and as Stephen said, another thing to reiterate, this is not saying you shouldn't have standards.
Yeah.
My general kind of estimation is get to have your self-knowledge and understand who you are. If you can't respect yourself, if you can't value yourself, you're not going to find somebody who can truly like you. If you don't like yourself and you meet somebody who seems to like you, acts like they like you will subconsciously or consciously think, this person likes trash because you think you're trash. Like, or this person is not able to actually recognize what trash is because you think you're trash. If you
Yeah.
value yourself, then you'll be able to pick out and say, okay, this person values me. You value yourself for X, Y, Z. Then that person, in order to establish, does this person really like me, they would have to indicate that they value X, Y, Z at all. Doesn't mean you don't have ABC that's negative. But if you have those X, Y, Z, you'll be able to say, okay, this person values my X, Y, Z and realizes my ABC is something that comes with it, and we can both address those things. But if you don't know those things about you, I think that's going to be a mixed up thing. And then on top of that, I think, let's say you have 5 things that you consider to be important in somebody that you're going to have as a partner. That's a good thing to have, but also realize if you have 5 things that you say these are 5 things that I have, 2 of them are things that I just must have or nothing else, then one is kind of negotiable, and then 3 can be thrown away. I mean, the last 2 can be thrown away, can be switched out here and there. Also expect that person that you're with to have those 5 things as well. They don't have to match your 5 things. Chances are they won't, just from the sexual dimorphism to begin with, if it's male female. Now if it's male male or female female, or the different kind of all the different kind of genders that are in there, all those type of things, that's when now you can have different things. But if you have 5 things, 2 things that are a must, 1 thing that's negotiable, 2 that can be thrown away, expect the person you're with to also have their 5 things, 2 that are a must, 1 that's negotiable. And once you have that kind of thing, they don't have to be the same things, but you're at least meeting each other on, I think, a same level playing field. And in my estimation, I'm single, but from the successful relationships that I've seen, I'm the kind of guy who's given pretty decent advice to people in relationships and seem to work for them. But I'm not in a position yet where I think I can pursue that relationship. My set of 5 things haven't been achieved yet, so I can't expect somebody else to see those things in me. But neither here nor there for that. Okay, it's not there, but it's somewhere over here. It's not here, but it's somewhere over there.
It's all
But
right.
with that thing, I think having that kind of basic, once you have that thing, you're on a level playing field. At least you're focused on similar things, and your expectations are in a decent kind of point of view. I don't know.
Yeah, well, to sort of add to what you were saying, and you and I discussed this off the camera yesterday. I was saying, some people get mad when you say this, but I always make the comparison. Think of like getting with a certain person, especially someone who's in high demand, like applying for a job. You apply for a job, there's all these other candidates who want the same position. You want, I mean, again, it's kind of this bumper sticker slogan now, but high value man. Well, you accept the reality that a lot of other women are competing for the same man. And then the question is, how do you stand out? And I was critical of somebody I know who just kind of has this attitude of, oh, I'm just going to be pretty and offer sex and he's going to give me a life of luxury. And it's like, well, is that a skill? Is that one? Is that adding value? And two, is that hard to come by? I mean, that's like saying, hire me for this high paying job. Oh, I can do minimal work. It's like, you're not offering something like, yeah, everyone wants the paycheck. The question is, what are you contributing to justify it? Like, why should it be given to you versus everyone else? Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, I don't really have too much to say with this. Like with this series, Stephen read the book and then
Mm-hmm.
he's reading excerpts from the chapters, and we're going chapter by chapter so far. We'll get to the point where we'll start skipping or putting things together, since it's just the way Stephen has gone through the book. He understands some of the stuff is repetitive, but this is a good book. I think
Yeah.
before we get into the thing, the way we'll do it, we're in chapter 4 now. He'll just read some excerpts through it, then you'll kick it back and we'll have a conversation back and forth. That's
Yeah.
how the previous 3 parts have gone as well. And of course, in the first part, second part, as it goes, as the series goes on, the introduction in the part might be shorter and shorter, as we've talked about many of the
Yeah.
things. But in the first book, in the first part, we go more into just like our thoughts on general topics and relationships, and some of those things get
Yeah.
repetitive. So definitely check out the rest of the series. If you got anything else to say before we get into it, I'll just read the excerpt here from the Amazon.
Yeah, to
So
add to your point, I'll probably stop giving an introduction because I'm assuming after a certain point, if you're 3, 4 videos into this, you've probably seen the others and you have an idea of what the book's about. So, I mean,
yeah.
if you're starting in the middle of this, it kind of doesn't make sense. So,
Yeah, I think maybe a couple more down. We might just do the start, say the
yeah,
hello, and then read this initial part. Okay, so
yeah.
this is what they say at Amazon. This is what they decided to list: an eye-opening, funny, and painful, and always truthful, in-depth examination of modern relationships, and a wake-up call for single women about getting real about Mr. Right. You have a fulfilling job, great friends, and a perfect apartment. So what if you haven't found the one just yet? He'll come along someday, right? But what if he doesn't? Or what if Mr. Right has been, well, Mr. Right in front of you, but you passed him by? Nearing 40 and still single, journalist Lori Gottlieb started to wonder, what makes for lasting romantic fulfillment, and are we looking for those qualities when we're dating? Are we too picky about trivial things that don't matter, and not picky enough about the often overlooked things that do? In
Yeah.
Marry Him, Gottlieb exposes an all too common dilemma: how to reconcile the desire for a happy marriage with a list of must haves and deal breakers so long and complicated that many great guys get misguidedly eliminated. On a quest to find the answer, Gottlieb sets out on her own journey to in search of love, discovering wisdom and surprising insights from sociologists and neurobiologists, marital researchers, and behavioral economists, as well as single and married men and women of all generations. So I'm thinking of going to Marshall and things like that, because that style is like love is a battlefield. Whereas like
Yeah.
what's that song? Is it Pat Benatar? Okay, but not that song is stuck in my head. So people seem to take this as a battle when I don't think it's ever been that case. It shouldn't be a battle. You shouldn't be fighting each other or fighting. You're not even fighting other people for it. It might be a competition, but not everything competitive is a battle, if that makes any sense. You're
Yeah.
competing in the dating market, but you're not. It's not like a war where you're out there like you have to take down opponents and people you're competing for the same goal. Because when it comes down to it, you are an individual with, yes, there might be many people that are similar to you, but you're that one person, and they might be a partner out there that there's certain similarities, but there's still that one person. And for most people, like I said, with the stroke of this book, you have to find one. So yes, you might say there's millions and millions of people now online, all these dating profiles, but still, there's one you and there's one person you're looking for. So one of my cousins kind of said this thing where some woman posted something like "all men are pigs," and he was like, "Who told you to try them all? Like you don't need to try them all. You don't need to date every single person. You don't need to every person that matches you. You don't have to like contemplate this is something. If you kind of know what you want, you can kind of focus it down and find that person. And also, if you are confident in who you are and projecting that out there, that's also going to attract that other person, because that other person might also be out there looking for someone like you. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. I'm set to jump right in. So.
Okay, so let's go. Chapter 4, tell us about the name or
All right.
whatnot, and
So,
just get into
so
it.
the chapter is called Speed Dating Disaster. For those who listened to the last video, she ended the last chapter basically talking about how she was working with a match. Was I'm trying to remember if he was a matchmaker or what, and basically he was setting her up to do speed dating, and it ended with her saying that, okay, let me tell you about that, and that's what this chapter starts with. Yeah. All right. So okay, so she talks about she'd heard about speed dating for years. For those people who don't know, it's basically where you you basically go to a certain place. You'll usually sit down with strangers for a few minutes each, and the idea is you determine within a few minutes of time spent with each of them, would you want to see them again? The idea is basically, okay, if you can meet lots of different people and which one has the best shot of being a potential good partner. I mean, obviously, again, it's a quick segment, but the idea is that it's a way to sort of evaluate a lot of people in a short time. So she talks about she went to this restaurant. She went on basically 10 mini blind dates in the span of an hour. And then there was actually a scorecard that the guy organizing gave to them, and you mark a yes if you're interested. And then if they give the guys the same scorecard, and then if you both mark yes, then they'll let you both know, and then you decide you want to see each other again. So she went to one Thursday night. It was for singles 40 to 50 years old. She was 41, and they said it was for a 30 to 40 group. But the speed dating company said there was a 1 year grace period. So um, she figured she could have done 30 to 40, but she said stuck with the 40 to 50. She just thought it was better. So she was kind of excited. Oh, I'm going to meet 10 single guys. I wasn't really meeting guys working from home. So I thought, okay, this is a good chance to get out here and meet someone. So, then she says, how bad could it be? Here we go. So at 7 p.m., she arrives at a trendy restaurant. There were two tops arranged in rows. There were 9 other women. 7 of them were no older than 42, were already there. 6 had a male counterpart across from them. So that means that there were 6 men for every 10 women, which of course concerned her a little bit. But then she, like said in the last chapter, kind of realized, well, given her age, it makes sense. I mean, most women at this point are married or just are not trying to. Um, so she checked out the 6 men. All but one looked older than 50, and one guy looked so old that he looked like her best friend's father. Is like so much for the grace period. So there they were, early, 8 early 40-ish women, 2 late 40-ish women, 1 mid 40-ish man, and 5 men over 50. So of course they were told you get to know them, you listen to the bell, and then you would move one chair over to the next candidate. So the guy number 1 was Sam. He was bald and wrinkled and wearing a plaid sport coat with patches on the elbows. He had 5 minutes to chat. Um, it started off innocent. Are you from Los Angeles? He asked, and said, yes, I'm a local. And they said, I'm a local, and that's where I asked where he was from. He said New York. I'm trying to make the best. She said, trying to make best of the fact that she was sitting across from someone who looked like a grandpa from Las Vegas. So what brought you to the West Coast? A plane. He barely containing a grin, like he was the first person to make this joke. She smiled. There was a long pause. It's a long story. And then he said, and then it's kind of like, well, this is speed dating. How, in detail can we get? As simple. I like the weather. I moved out for college. There was a job. Would have been nice. Instead, he said we didn't get along with his family, so he moved as far away as he could. He couldn't finish his PhD because his dissertation advisor had a heart attack. He tried to transfer schools but didn't get in. Then he moved with this woman he thought he would marry, but then left. She left him for another guy. He ended up working for a temp agency. Yeah, and how that didn't work out because ding, thankfully it ended, and I got to the next candidate. Okay. Thoughts and comments before I continue with the next candidate.
It's it sounds rather depressing.
Yeah.
But yeah, like you said, it's for people who want to be single. Some people seem to want that, but then even if you don't really want companionship, let's just say, okay, this book is focusing on people to get the companionship. Like at this point, she'd already had a kid of her own, right? She said
Yeah.
artificial insemination. So at this point, she'd had a kid. Now she's looking for a partner, and I know more women are doing this now, where they're just like, okay, I'm just going to be a single mom by myself, by choice, not like the
Yeah.
whole situation where you're with somebody and the person leaves you. So people are it's not that many. It's probably, I'd say maybe 5% of the single mothers, and the
I
single
would
mother
also
in my,
well
Go
Well, to
ahead.
sort of add to what you're saying, think about how expensive this is too, and that's not something everyone can afford because it's what, like 10, 12 grand, I think, to do it, and it's like the majority of people don't have that cash on hand. So
Yeah.
yeah,
And with that, so that's already selects for the certain people that are going to do it. And I'd say one about 5% at most of single mothers are single mothers by choice, where they're like, I had no intention of having a lasting relationship with this person, and my plan is to do this. They're focusing on entering single motherhood and do not want the male donor of that, whether it's a sperm bank or just as somebody they know, like we're getting this. And yes, I still do think the other ones, if you're of adult age, you know enough to know that intercourse is going to can result in kids. So that whole idea like it just happened, I don't really buy that stuff. I
no,
know you might not have been intending to do it, but if you intended to get drunk or whatever, or just get into any situation where you have the intercourse, that's an option. It's an option. And it's something we said in the previous parts. There's also a very short window. I'm not a biologist. I'm not a fertility doctor, but I think there's a window of like a week or two, a
yeah,
week
with a
or
woman.
so where
The woman
yeah,
is ovulating before her period.
yeah,
Now, I looked into this a little bit since you brought it up, and they said women can get pregnant when they're having their period. Like people do it during the period. I
mhm,
don't recommend that, but you can. There's also the other thing too is that semen can live in the woman for up to 5 days. So if you do it 5 days before, it can sit. But again, if your period is happening regularly and you know that, I mean, you know, okay, 5 days before during that
mhm.
time, I mean, you can plan accordingly. You got to exercise some self control, but it's like if you know in advance, I mean, you can't really blame other
Yeah.
people. Yeah.
So there's ways to get to that, and then I do. That's a single mother. That's never married with a kid. That's what I consider that. If you're a widower, that's different. There's a term widower. It's a different kind of situation.
Yeah.
And of course, yeah. So that's what I'm thinking about in that place. But so even if you have that kid, I think it's a positive thing. You have somebody to be there in your life and care for and things like that. If you have a positive relationship, a healthy relationship with that child for the rest of your life, but then I advise companionship, some kind of companionship, and then maybe if you have friends and things like that. But then also if you have strong friends, yes, it gets to a point where maybe many of your friends are married off and things like this, so you're not really in the same circles. But I was just thinking about the sadness with this speed dating thing in the past. This current meta of having this level of control that you have in dating. And again, this is also this book. I think we did mention this before, but she's in New York City, if I'm not correct, right? No, she was
Oh
in
yeah.
LA. She's in LA.
She
So
yeah
it's a
she's
bigger
in yeah.
city. So she's looking at big metropolis people. Where this whole idea of this mega city type of thing, it's not mega city like George Dredd yet, but these large cities where you have all these options, that level of choice of people and potential to actually choose from seems to be a massive amount, and then it shrinks really fast.
Yeah.
It's like they're like in a few years, like because people start getting married, people start moving away. A
Yeah.
lot of the people who get married, people who might have been in your friend circle, who might have been you meeting people together, once they get married, they're no longer going to the clubs, they're no longer in the same place, or they might move to a different place where the other person's from. So that actual circle of people shrinks really fast. So the window you have of having the level of selection that is already unprecedented from just human history of dating, because in human history you'd couple with a few like 10 or so people in your age group in whatever area that you were living in. By the time you were in your 20s, you already coupled up with one of those people. Then colleges came along where, especially specifically in the United States of America, you just go to college and then you're around hundreds or thousands of people in your same age group and you seem like you have all these ideas. But then still, realistically, there's still only like a handful of those people out of those thousands that would ostensibly actually date you. You could probably get a whole bunch of them to sleep with you and things like that, but to actually date you, that's a smaller amount of people. Then after that, you're like, okay, now you're starting to get into the workforce. You're focusing on all these other things because you've had those years of like, okay, now we need to focus on these other things. The actual environment at the offices for meeting people is now a different sort of thing. So there's just a lot of difficulties there. It's already new to have this level of choice, but in the past, I think I wrote down here speed dating versus no dating because this speed dating sounds very sad. Maybe when you're younger, there was more exciting with speed dating. I don't know if somebody's had a good experience with speed dating. I've never really gone on
I
speed
never
dating.
I
I
never
haven't
I never
done
did it. Yeah.
it doesn't seem like something appealing to me. But in the past, people, yes, there were some more arranged marriages, or your parents would come, or it would be through your friends, where those people know things about you already, so you don't need to sit there and try to make a connection with somebody in 5 minutes. And yes, they talk about that thing where, oh, attraction happens, you know, if you're attracted to someone in the first 30 seconds. That's a very base level sort of like pheromone type of thing where there's a
Yeah.
certain look or there's certain physicality, certain shape. You can see like a silhouette of a woman or a silhouette of a male, and there's
Yeah.
something that just biologically gets you to that person. But we are more than that. We are more than our simple biologics. This whole idea that, oh, you know who you're going to be attracted to or not in the first 30 seconds. Maybe if you're some kind of like base ass animal, but I think most people have higher level things that can attract someone to them where you actually see that person and you get to know more about them, or there's familiar things, or if you meet that person, because, sorry, I'm rambling here, but also depending on where you meet that person you're meeting them for those first 30 seconds, it might be the worst 30 seconds they've experienced in the last month, but every other 30-second time you meet this person might be a great experience. So you're not even selecting it, just the best of this person. So that whole idea that that's how you tell attraction, I don't really buy that. But yes, people have preferences. Some people like blondes. Some people like bigger women. Some people like jacked men. Some people might like, very few women might actually like shorter men. But if you have that thing, there might be something that might attract you to somebody. But to actually keep you hooked on, I don't think those first impressions really do as much as I think they actually do. So when you have this situation where it's like 5 minutes, I don't really see a point of actually achieving anything worthwhile in a speed dating situation. But maybe I'm just doing it wrong, or I'm unsure, and that's
Yeah.
my
So
whole ramble
the book
rant.
the book will get into this later as time goes on, and I'll just read from that because it's, we're going to talk about it anyway. But she talks about there are a lot of cases of couples where they first meet and they're actually not blown away by each other, but as they
Yeah.
talk, the attraction builds because it's, oh, I didn't know you had this in common, oh, you went to the same school I did, oh, you know the same people, and then, but it takes time for the connection to develop. And I think one of the things that people forget in the modern era with, short attention span, supposed ADD, all this other stuff, it's, oh, why am I not blown away by someone right away, and then they give up, when in reality you have to be patient and give someone the chance, and they have to give you the chance as well, and then be willing to say, okay, it's not going to blow me away, but work through it. Then you're like, hey, I'm glad I gave that a chance. So
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess we'll get to go into
all right,
more of these
so
dates.
yeah.
Sounds
So number two was
interesting.
Paul. He was a another grandpa, thinning gray hair, turkey chin. She asked what kind of work he does. He says in transition. She asked what he was transitioning from and to. He said he worked as a teacher, which he loved, but he hated the politics. So now he was playing a lot of golf. He'd really like to move from a one-bedroom rental, but since he wasn't working, he couldn't afford a two-bedroom. He wanted to change careers, but it's hard when you're 55 because employers only want to hire youngsters these days. He was in the middle of a tirade about the principal of the school when I heard the blessed ding. The next guy sat down. Guy number three was Sandy. He was cute and the youngest guy there, mid 40s. Everyone asked me what Sandy is short for. He said, and I said it's short for Sanford, like Sandy Koufax, the baseball player. His name was Sanford too, Sanford Koufax. He smiled. Sandy was a speed dating veteran. He'd been doing it for years. He told a lot of jokes. It sounded like he had been telling them for years. He had terrible grammar. Every time he made a mistake, he asked me to correct what the word was. He said, you being a writer and all, he was a sweet guy in a little boy kind of way, but we were like oil and water. And after 5 minutes, I was eager for the ding. Guy number four was Roger. He was handsome in an older man way, like Bill Clinton. After some small talk, Roger told me he had moved to Los Angeles in 1973. Remember the gas shortage, those long lines? I was six. I wanted to say, he asked, she's saying I was six. I wanted to say, but instead I smiled and asked what he did for a living. He owned an employment agency, but business was bad. She told him that she was a writer. Roger says, do you need a job? She thought he was kidding. He said, not at the moment, but I'll let you know if that changes. Maybe you can help me. He didn't get the joke. You shouldn't wait till you're between jobs to find something. You should look while the iron's hot. Thanks, she said, humoring him. I'll keep that in mind. Writers have it so easy. Continue. What do you do all day? Hang out in your pajamas? She's like, no, not really. Oprah, she said, excuse me, do you watch Oprah every day? All the writers I work with, they don't do anything. The bell ding, Roger slipped his card. Really, I can help. As he moved to the next table, I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Okay. Then there's a next section called His Daughter is 34. Any thoughts or comments before I continue?
um, I mean, that's something Stephen and I have talked about. When you get to a certain age, yes, there's some reasons why, okay, you've traveled around, you've done this, and then also you look back historically. It's not like actually coupling up is something that's taken for given. I
Yeah.
think historically, and at least I remember there was actually stats taken like right at the time when when society switched from hunter gatherer to farmers. At that time, there was some studies done. This is like Bronze Age type. So this is a common thing where 70% of the females in that community that was studied had passed on their genetics, and only 30% of the males. Now, that's of course a culture where there's polygamy is a lot more accepted and things like that. So
Yeah.
you can imagine that, or not even just polygamy, but maybe it's like the world's a lot more dangerous. So a lot of the men who might couple up early, they get killed when they're out like cutting down a tree, or some wild animal takes them out, or there's some wars and they pass out. Then the women who are already fertile and like desirable, they find somebody else. It's that kind of thing. So that even happens. So that could kind of reduce the level, but I don't know. But that was there. So that whole idea of we are expected to have somebody. It's
Well,
not quite
I
right.
but
Yeah.
I think what a friend says is right though. About he said like one of our friends, he's like about in his late 40s, and he said to me, he's like, the reason this seems harder is because with dating, the reality is a lot of the good people do drop out very quickly. And I think
Mhm.
about like certain people, like for example with me, you know, I'm not saying my life is where I want it to be now. I'm still working, but I mean each year, you know, I'm making more money, I'm more confident, I have more friends and all this. So I'm thinking of myself now versus when I was in my early 20s, I have a lot more to offer. But there were other people that maybe were good students in school, got into the right colleges, met the right people. Maybe they, you know, knew they had help from their families, other things. So there's some of those circumstances thrown in too. Now, as you said, people traveling and stuff, and that's the case with the woman I'm seeing because she's not from the US. She had to travel around. English isn't her first language. So, yeah, it was tougher to meet someone. Oh, and she also works a lot. So it makes sense. But, you know, when I heard her age, I wasn't going to write her off as a bad candidate because all of that makes sense to me. Whereas there are other people, men and women both, who could easily be married, but it's either they're very picky or they overestimate themselves or there's other things. And I think you just have to get to know the person to figure out what the case is. Yeah.
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 Yeah, that's a similar thing for me. I've just been moving around, not quite sure, not quite settled in the location long enough, and not like established in that place where you can be like, okay, if I get somebody, they can actually say, okay, if we want to be in this place, this person has shown that they can actually establish a location in this place, because the kind of relationship you're looking for is something rather stable that at least in general, and also personally, mentally, I was all over the place for quite some time. I think I came there's a lot I need to do for. I'm thinking if I actually had managed to find somebody in some situation and been in something more long term, but maybe my mentality at that point in my 20s was not even capable of doing that because
Yeah.
I'm thinking the mentality I had then, the sort of person that would be attracted to me at that time that we coupled up with, the person who I am today would not be with that person. So like they would have, I can imagine there being some kind of divorce or some kind of strife, but maybe I could have found somebody who we could have grown together. I don't know those things, but I'm just
It's
saying
hard
like
to
once
say.
you,
Yeah.
yeah, but just once you get to a certain point, like she said, it's there's going to be issues. Like you're not going to find like really just stable, great people with like at this point. Because if you're stable, great, and all these type of things, why wouldn't you have coupled up before? So yeah, that's the kind of thing that you're going to see. And with some of these things, if you're actually if you're listening to this and you're single in your 30s or your 40s, let us know why you think you're single. Okay, especially if you want to actually date. I haven't been actually even attempting to date for the last like 5, 6 years, so it's I can completely understand why that. But if you've actually been attempting to, or you want to be dating, or you don't want to be single, this one thing we talked about. You can be involuntarily celibate as a male in general, but being an incel as a female, involuntary celibate, is pretty much zero to none. Like you find
Yeah.
somebody. So if you're involuntarily single, though, and this is also the same thing with men. Some men would prefer to have relations. Most men, I think, would prefer to have relations with a relationship as well, not just have the sexual relations by themselves. So if you're in a situation where you find yourself to be involuntarily single, what are some things that you think are about your personal life and also maybe your friend circle, things like that, your circumstances that lead you to be in that situation? I would be interested in y'all letting us know just whatever you get in this.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
like you're saying, it's like I mean, there's really no involuntary, there's no incel women, and that's why I get annoyed when certain women, I won't mention names, but they'll be like, "Oh, I get laid, whatever." It's like what woman has trouble getting sex. Like someone pointed out, look up videos for advice for women on how to get sex. They don't exist because there's no need for them. It's like, if likely when women complain about being single, it's usually just I can't get the ideal guy that I feel I deserve. But
Mhm.
then the question becomes, are you not is the problem that your standards are too high? Is it you don't bring as much as you think you do? Are you passing up guys for petty reasons like some of the women in here? It's like those questions are all worth asking. Again, I'm not saying men don't do this either, but it's like it's worth at least asking these questions. All right, next
Yeah, like
section.
I just
Oh, sorry. Go
before we
ahead.
get,
Go ahead, and then I'll yeah.
we saw this recent thing of a newspaper or no, this paper where some woman, she's Australian but she's of Oriental ethnicity. She's was very fit. Like I think she had a six pack. Very fit, bubbly. She seemed to be maybe late 20s, early 30s. But she had this thing of how I hacked Tinder and had 15 dates in like 25 days. She was in a New York trip and she just had 15 dates from Tinder. And I'm like, hacked? You mean be a female that's relatively fit and attractive? You can find 15 people to go out with. I'm surprised she didn't do 25 days of somebody to go out with. But that's
Yeah.
different. Like we said, involuntary celibate doesn't happen. Involuntary not dating, that's also another thing. You can find people to take you on dates, but to find somebody that you want to have a long-term relationship with, that's something that I think is not as easy to do as some of these other things.
Yeah. All right. So next section is called "His Daughter is 34." There was no guy number 5 because due to the male to female ratio at one time, 4 of the women were seated alone. So the event coordinator sat from across, helped her to pass the time. She was cute, 30ish, and funny. I told him this was my first speeding event. What wasn't age range supposed to be 40 to 50? He said, "I know we use the honor system, but this happens every time. The guys in their 40s won't come to this event because they want to meet women in their 30s. We thought about enforcing the age limit, but if we tell if we tell men in their 40s that they can't go to the younger event, we'll lose all our clients." So the coordinator moved on to another moved the cute coordinator moved on to keep another partnerless 40ish woman company. So she was alone for round 6 2, started talking to this woman next to her. She was a tall blonde dentist in a sexy dress. She was smart, funny, and outgoing. Turns out they jog at the same park, and they just finished reading the same book. They're chatting for about 5 minutes, and then she could imagine being friends with her. And for the first time in the night, she was actually bummed when the ding sounded. So then she met guy number 5. His name was Kevin. He had a water filtration business. I happen to be in the market for water filters, so I asked if his system filters out fluoride. The dentist over there asked me the same question. He said, "How weird is that?" And she's like, "I don't think it was weird that a dentist would ask about fluoride, and so would a woman with a young child." But he repeated this at least 3 times. After a series of "How weird is that?" he answered my questions. I'm not sure, is fluoride a compound? How could he own a water filtration business and not know something so basic? Fluoridated water wouldn't be an obscure topic to someone who filters water for a living. Most of the national water supply is fluoridated. Um, he learned that she's a journalist and did the hard sell on pitching an article about his company. She deflected. She told him, "I didn't write about business." She tried to change the subject. He didn't take the hint and just kept badgering her about writing an article for his company. Um, Desperate, she said, "I'm not a journalist." And then, uh, after all, I was kidding. I'm an accountant. My job has nothing to do with writing has nothing to do with writing or water, writing about water, but I didn't have the chance to say it because I heard the ding. So she was going to make a joke to blow him off. Didn't happen. Guy number 6 sat down. His name was Robert. He was a widower. He was smart, sweet. He was a lawyer. He was probably very handsome 30 years ago. Never been to a speed dating event. Um, in the interest of disclosure, he explained he's actually 60, but there are no speeding events for people his age. So what do people do if they're single past 50 or 55? Why am I still single? How will I meet men then? Uh, Earlier, she looked around, noticing the 2 older women who looked close to 50 were hanging on Robert's every word. Robert wasn't making a lot of eye contact with them, but these women were flirting. They were so eager, and they didn't have a shot. She was thinking, this could be me in 10 years, I thought, and I realized that is me at the event. This is my life now too. So she chatted with Robert. He was interesting and kind, but then she found out his daughter was 34, and she was kind of taken aback by that. Yeah, so his daughter tried a speed dating event. He said, no, she's married. He laughed. In fact, I just became a grandfather again. And she's like, again. And she was kind of like, wait a minute, getting with a guy who's a grandfather already. My son has one too. He's got a 2-year-old. I was speechless. This man's kids were married with kids. My son was his grandson's age. I stared at the table and broke the silence. What about you? Have you been married? And then she's thinking, he asked her if she was married. She said she was thinking, no, at this rate, I never will be. She said, not yet. And then since she had met all 6 men, she sat alone for the last 2 rounds and filled out the scorecard. She checked no on every box. Okay. Thoughts and comments? Yeah.
It's it's like, hello, darkness, my old friend. It's just like, yeah. So we interestingly started the series when Stephen was single, and then because we started like at the end of last year, and then
Yeah.
we've taken some time to get back on it. But yeah, these are just some things where I'm also relating to her on her point of view, but also seeing from the guy's point of view. Just imagining, like, I
Yeah.
don't know, because
Well, the reality, like we're saying, I mean, a lot of good people drop out, and then the thing is, these women complain about older men having kids, but it's like a lot of these guys either chose to be bachelors this whole time, or they were married and divorced, and now they have kids. It's like that's just the reality of most men you'll be dating, or they're just not interested in dating. They've just decided to be bachelors for the rest of their lives. So it's like that's just the reality in most cases. Like there aren't there aren't a ton of guys who have all these options and just said, no, I held out on all of them up until I was 50. And I think that's sort of the reality that she's struggling with because she's expecting to meet that ideal guy. But it's like, if he was such a great catch, he would have probably married someone who was also a great catch by now. Yeah.
yeah, and there's also the thing where it's like, okay, why is he focusing on going on the speed dating thing at that
Yeah.
age? It's a kind of thing where you can also meet people in different places. Let's say, for example, if you're just like in a ceramics, if you're living in a city, maybe you say, oh, I like ceramics or hobbies. There's other things you can still do
Yeah.
at that age where you do it. And there's just something, maybe there's something inorganic I feel about this kind of concerted effort towards dating in particular versus, and this is something that I've talked about or thought about when people say, okay, these dating apps. I'm like, yes, because in many of those cases, people aren't really going and being their genuine selves on these dating apps. Or some people are there just to get hookups. Some people are there just to get free dinners and things like that. Other people are there because they just had a terrible relationship and they're trying to get like a rebound. But a lot of those people, when they go on these sites, it's a very curated thing. They make up and they take
Yeah.
Photoshop and do all these things and do the things, and it's like they're editing their profiles where they seem so like fluent. Okay, these are the things that people actually go on there. Like, what are the key words that get people the most? And like these are not the interests I have, but in order to actually get the most clicks and select for this sort of guy, I'm good to put these things. Or a man will be like, okay, I'm good to hide these actual aspects of myself and put this out there, or go to this technique, or just like write, and then eventually like enough people come, and not even look at the profiles. So that kind of focus on that sort of thing when you're not being genuinely yourself, or maybe there's no self to actually be genuine with to begin with, that's a horrible start to any sort of relationship. If you're
There's a
going
there's
on there and yeah, go ahead.
there's a section in the book later that gets into this about dating websites, and they talk about some of the science behind that
Okay.
too, about how putting up more information, people will actually disqualify you because, like, for example, if you'll say like I like, and you have like very specific music, certain people will see that and be like, well, they don't like exactly what I like, so I'm writing them off.
Okay.
And then there's the whole thing with men who will make good money but don't want to show it because they're worried about attracting gold diggers. But then there's other men who will use that to get women. But then in turn, like, how many of those women want them for them versus how many are just hoping to get a rich guy and get a life of luxury. So it's interesting. I mean, that's a later section, but like she does explore some of that as well because she was both evaluating guys' profiles, but she was also deciding what do I want to put on mine to sell myself the best. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was thinking, there's other ways to there's ways to use the tools of dating apps, or this, because like, look, this, somebody says, okay, the dating app is impersonal, you don't really meet somebody, but I'm like, if somebody's not that decent of a person on a dating app, they're not that decent of a person. If you went to a speed dating thing, you're sitting across from them, that mismatch would still be there. But I think a better way to do it is just to, again, have the self knowledge, do the things you care about, and actually live those things in public. Like, instead of just saying, okay, I'm going to put the entire weekend to just focus on speed dating, be like, okay, I'm going this weekend. I want to go to this museum, so I'm going to go to the museum. And while I'm at the museum, since haven't seen this museum for some time, I'm also going to check online and see if I can meet a date off of this app by the museum. So you do that. So you meet the person there, and then you have the date there. Or let's say you've actually been to the museum, then you go to the date. In that situation, you're adding that as part of your life. You're still living your life. And you can, okay, I met this person after the date, or maybe you already have a plan to do something, and then you say, do you want to do that thing together? Versus just focusing on just that alone. I don't know, and maybe it's completely wrong because like I'm single here. I'm not talking about having really been in the dating game, not in the meta. But I think if you're doing something you're going to be doing anyway, the chances of you meeting somebody who's in that kind of sphere also while you're doing these things or is interested in participating in those things raises the chance that if you're doing something on your free time or you're making time to do and you find somebody else also doing that thing on their free time and making things to do, then that's a lot more it's raising the chance of you having something in common with them versus just focusing on the things they do in order to maintain life, the things that they just do as a job, the things they just happen to do historically. Those are things that are rather secondary to them actually living, I think.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing that's great about Christine, the woman I'm seeing, is that we're both very passionate about food, and we have interesting conversations because her being from Singapore, she has that background, so she can talk about that stuff. And a lot of Western stuff is actually foreign to her. Like she actually didn't know what a pretzel was till the other day. But then you realize, like for her, this is foreign. And then when we go to a lot of places that are more Western, she'll usually have me order, and I'll ask like, "Do you like these things or whatever?" Because like, especially if the words are in other languages, she has no idea. So like when we went to Huertas, it's Spanish, but it's Basque Spanish. So to her, this is just like, I have no idea what this is. But then we went to the Indonesian place. Again, she's not Indonesian, but nearby. But then she sees certain dishes and it's like, oh, yeah, this is this. We have this in Singapore or Malaysia. This is similar. So it's like there's that common ground where we both have the same interest, but we also learn from each other, which is fun too. Yeah.
Yeah. And was that something that came up when you were still like and I guess we can talk about this more when we get to the one where they're talking about the dating apps type of thing. But yeah, I
Yeah.
think I think we can get to that. Yeah. All right.
All right. So there's just this is a short chapter. There's only one more section. It's called the post mortem. Basically, she's just evaluating what happened. All right. So this was it. The event was over. The event coordinator had us give ourselves a round of applause. Congratulations, you suffered through this night successfully, and asked to turn in the scorecards. The younger women collected their purses. The coordinator noticed the expressions. He said, "Try it again another time. Maybe it'll be different." He added unconvincingly. On the way out, she passed the bar area of the restaurant. There were smiling young men and women were talking and milling about. Nobody seemed to be over 30, so she was driving home. Added up the cost of the blown evening. The event was $25 for the event, $40 for the babysitter, $8 for parking. Of course, the time spent showering, shaving legs, blow drying hair, applying makeup, etc. 1.5 hours. Round trip in rush hour traffic, an hour. She's saying lost evening that could have been spent with my beloved son, priceless. No, she's like, I didn't blame the event planner for all this. I blame myself. I realized that it was simply the consequence of having made bad dating decisions when I was younger. I knew that people met through speed dating all the time. I even knew someone who went to a 25 to 35-year-old event when she was 29 and met her husband who was 32. She'd been to 3 events, and at each one, she told me there was an equal number of men and women. Some of the guys were duds, but most were relatively enjoyable to talk to. They didn't have a lot of baggage or sob stories. If they lived in crappy apartments, they had promising careers. They didn't remind her of her friends' fathers. Later, she asked about a single 40-year-old friend about her speed dating experiences. Was my experience unusual? No, not at all. It sounds pretty typical for a 40s to 50 events. She said that when she was 38 and 39, she'd go to a couple of 30 to 40 events, and while the guys were far more appealing, she marked yes next to several. They were only interested in women in their early 30s. I'd always heard that dating gets harder the older you get, but I'd never taken it seriously before. I didn't consider that one decision, say passing up a good guy because something was missing, could change the course of my life forever. Back in my 20s and early 30s, I hadn't yet spoke to women in their 40s and 50s who were racked with regret about having broken up with a wonderfully nice guy for silly reasons, who are now 48 years old and who used to always have boyfriends and now have a manless existence that consists of an all-female social life. Um, She thought about her 30-year-old friend Julia, who broken up with Greg, the nonprofit guy, and was now dating Adam, the surgeon, but couldn't decide between the two. So she wanted to call her up and say that she should get her priorities straight and figure out which compromises she's willing to make. Because if she passes up both these guys now, they won't even be at the 40 to 50-year-old speeding events. In 10 years, she might be, though. Instead, she looked up Rachel Greenwald, who's a dating expert who specializes in coaching women over 35 to see what advice she might have. I mean, I was 41, but I wasn't dead. I needed to hear something hopeful. So that's the end of that chapter and the end of part one. Part two is called From Fantasy to Reality. So yeah.
All right, yeah. With this one, I'm just thinking there might be some generational knowledge that's kind of lost. Like in the past, you
Yeah.
weren't really moving around to many places, so you were normally living in an area where your great grandkids would be there, your aunts, your uncles, your nieces, nephews, cousins, the great greats would be there. So there'd be some kind of shared experience. So first of all, that group already knows you enough that if you get to meet somebody, there's some familiarity with the people. But there's also the knowledge that I think was passed on. Of this is how it is to be X at this
Yeah.
age. This is how it is to be Y at that age. Now, that's something that I think is different in the United States of America. Is this in the West and maybe in other places as well, with this some kind of arbitrary break off of age groups. So it's like, okay, you only really talk to people around your age, because in part because of just the way schools are, where it's like, okay, everybody at this age group in this school, if you're born in this year, you're in this grade, and you just kind of go up
Yeah.
with those same groups. And yes, you deal with some people the year below, the year above for some time, but then you're mostly focused on that group alone. Like, so you hardly get to talk with people from 20 years ahead of where you're probably going
Yeah.
to be going to eventually. So if you had that more of that knowledge, more of that connection, I think at a younger age, I think some people might be more realistic about certain things that they desire for life or certain things that they want to actually achieve.
Well, I was going to add too. The Praxis guys talked about that with careers. They talk about having a network that's horizontally as well as vertically integrated, and what they mean is it's good to have peers that are in your age range, similar career, all that, but it's also you want people that are both ahead of you and behind you career wise, because it's you want people that can mentor you, you can look up to, and all that. But then as you rise through the ranks, you want people under you, because if they come to respect you, you can hire them, they can work for you. And then it's like, as you say, that knowledge gets passed on, and that's what's happened with that company, where some of the first apprentices are now opening their own companies. They're hiring new apprentices. Down the line, those apprentices will go start their own companies, and the knowledge keeps expanding and being passed on, rather than, okay, I only hang out with people that are at my level and that's it. It's like you don't really. I mean, you do learn things from people your own age, obviously, but it's like it's kind of limited because they just don't have the experience and knowledge yet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I definitely do think that's something that has been lost with some current timeline sort of cultures and societies that I think can, again, with all the technology and the tech that we have, that's something that is actually beneficial. And I think when you see somebody, one of the good examples of this, whether you like him or not, is Jordan Peterson, where
Yeah.
he has filled that role. Even someone like a Kevin Samuels, if you're talking more towards like the black community in the United States of America, there's certain people where I think that's actually there. Now, there might be others also for women that we're not, I don't know, is Oprah one, but how many people are really looking forward to Oprah, and how much does she actually talk about her personal life or day to day, or does she just talk to other people? There's got to be other people that for those of y'all, let me know
Yeah.
maybe even Lori Gottlieb is one of those people who people look up to her and they say, okay,
Yeah.
she's actually teaching me things about this. I don't think it's like people on like The View or things. Those are
No.
characters. Those are people just doing commentary. But like the Jordan Peterson type of people, the Kevin Samuels, whether you agree with their message or not, this is a situation where
Yeah.
I don't think there's many young men who haven't had older men even give them any advice, any realistic advice, or just basic birds and the bees type of thing. And maybe this again goes into the schools. The schools are too focused on LGBTQ plus those kind of things, trying to like don't say gay,
Yeah.
that kind of inanity type of stuff with like 5-year-olds talking about like, oh, we need to make sure we talk to what is less than 1% of the population who might be at my
Yeah.
school dealing with this. We need to focus on that. But they don't have just basic knowledge, basic talk about just relationships, where maybe the parents is like, okay, I'm going to trust the school to teach them about these things. And then the teacher's like, this is not stuff we can really talk about in the schools. We don't
Yeah.
have enough time to do this. So we're going to trust the parents to do this. And then no one's actually teaching the kids. And on top of that, even if you have teachers who are talking to them about certain things, what is the relationship between this? Some 30, let's say someone in their mid 30s or mid 40s is with a class of like 15 to 30 kids in like their teens. It's supposed to be, that's a conducive environment to talk about relationships. Like a kid is actually really going to bring up actual questions they might have about relationships when they're hormonal, when they have friends who might be like laughing about the things. Like it's not a conducive environment to talk about some very serious things in life. So that's just something. But hey, it's a creature of the state. So of course they're going to completely fail in getting strong, independent, and settled people who don't really need this huge apparatus to actually exist. And the teachers themselves are not incentivized to actually teach it to the kids, and the parents are not incentivized or not required to actually double check and make sure that the kids are being taught these things. And then the kids just are worse for it. That's, just think about it. Do you think kids are doing better now? Do you think they're happier now after decades of going through the K through 12 system? Do you think they're more adjusted into actually having relations with each other than they were 10, 20, 30 years ago? I don't know. Let me know what
Well,
you think.
regarding women and dating, there's a few YouTubers. Kevin Samuels actually had a woman on. Her name is Sean Booty. I don't really know much about her, but I listened to his talk with her, and it was kind of interesting because he talked about some of these issues, basically how the disconnect between women having certain high standards, but also women not knowing what men want, and then women saying, "No, I'd rather die alone or be a single mother than get it settle for an average guy." And then in turn, men become resentful, and that's what causes this whole gender war. And he's saying like women like him and men like women like her and men like him, they have to have these conversations because it's like that's how we at least begin to fix some of this stuff. And if it's just like telling women you can have it all, you can have it all, and then it's, oh, I'm entitled to all these things, so I'm not going to settle, but then they end up alone. And then same thing with guys. If they're most of these guys are being written off, the guys end up alone too. And it's just like we can't progress going forward. And especially as you got at in our black population with child illegitimacy so high. And I learned from him that what is it, 51% of black men are single and child is 64% are in the middle class. Like there are plenty of single black men. It's just the trend is that a lot of the guys having kids are having kids with a handful of women, but then those kids grow up in broken homes, they end up dysfunctional and all that, when in reality there's plenty of middle class black men who are available. It's just they're being written off, so they either end up dating women of other ethnicities or they just drop out. And it's like, but until they acknowledge this reality, it's like these problems are not going to get fixed. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and now that you mentioned that with the kids, also like I think I had some math wrong when I was talking about the past of 70%. Because also another big thing back then is women used to die a whole lot in childbirth. So
Yeah.
you might have like a lot of the women who were having kids, they would have a kid, maybe on their second or third kid, they would die, and then that
Yeah.
man would get another woman and then
Yeah.
have more kids. So yeah, it's just there's this challenge. It's like I don't even know. Like right now, what they said in New York, it was like I saw the other day it said like 30% of men in their 30s are still virgins or something, where it's like people
Yeah.
are just
I've
not
heard that
really
too.
dating anymore. So,
Yeah.
but that's one thing. I'm also wondering, is that really common? Is that uncommon? Maybe was back in like the Middle Ages. Are we thinking that like majority of men were having intercourse by the time okay, prostitution and things like that was probably higher. It's probably a
Yeah.
lot higher levels of sexual assault as well and things like that. But I don't know what's the average number in this state of nature for actual males to be able to actually couple with their mates. Let's say we had technology and society and civilization stripped away from us, just the human ape, like the Homo sapien. What would be the average? Like if you look at like chimps or you look at like gorillas, what's the average? I think in the gorillas, it probably I'd be surprised if over 50% of the males actually get to have intercourse with the female the entire their lifespan. I'd be surprised.
I'll I'll find it for you. But this whole thing about incels and everything, this is a recent phenomenon because they were showing the charts of men who identify as virgins. It went up in the last few decades, and
Okay.
there's various reasons for that. I mean, like you could say men who report as virgins, so it could maybe certain men lied in the past, and I'm sure men do now
Mhm.
too. But the point is like that gets into all the other issues, the issues with like feminism, entitlement, the whole thing about even an average looking woman puts herself on social media, she gets bombarded with attention, so she thinks she's a catch. She in turn writes off most guys because it's, well, I have all these men coming after me, I must be a catch. So then she won't get with average guys even though she's average herself. And then it's, okay, I'll sleep with a top tier high value man, but then what ends up happening is she just becomes one of several women in a rotation, and then she's hoping to marry a guy like that, but he won't marry her because he has so many options, and he's saying, what's the point? So it just it's just, I mean, in a way, it's kind of returning to the state of nature, but at the same time, technology has exacerbated this in like a weird kind of way. No, if that makes
Yeah, yeah,
sense. Yeah.
that's interesting. And we might
Yeah.
talk about that more here, or that might even be a subject we can just do like a shorter one on, just
Yeah.
focus on, because that's an interesting topic. If anyone else out there also knows any data
Yeah.
or places we can look up for that, let us know in the comments. Yeah, all right.
Because my thing is just like, if all these women are complaining about settling, there being no good men, it's like, what do these women bring to the table? I mean, the majority of people are average. It's like there's not a 6 foot tall Brad Pitt making six figures a year, six pack, waiting for every single woman. Those men are a small percentage of the population. And she even says later in here, I think like there are no men telling there are no women telling men to only date supermodels or whatever. It's like most people acknowledge that okay, most average men are going to end up with average women. I mean, that's just how things are. I don't know why. Yeah,
Because I'm
yeah,
wondering now with some of these lines you're hearing at speed dating, if those lines are working, I guess these men probably wouldn't still be speed dating.
yeah,
But there's got to be maybe millions of women now, single women who will be at speed dating, maybe not that high, but there's maybe millions of women who'd be like, oh, I'm playing, and they would actually find that funny. I don't know. It's weird. It's
yeah.
sad. Okay.
I don't really have much else to say. I mean, that's the end of the end of that chapter and the end of that section. The next one, she's going to get into talking to the different dating coaches and other people that are kind of giving her advice for selling herself and meeting someone better. I mean, ultimately, I don't think she did, but she learned a lot in the process, and that's what got her to inspire her to write the book. Because then she took a lot of the ideas that they gave her and said, like, I'm writing my story as kind of a cautionary tale. I don't want younger women to go down the same path I did. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
in my experience, some of his dating things, like even when I talk about someone like Kevin Samuels, I listen to some of his things. Yes, he's supposedly focusing on the concept of high value men, and he's focusing specifically in the black community. For I think he's actually more specific. His content seems to be more specifically for women, even though a lot of men listen to the stuff that he
Yeah.
is. He seems to be making content more specifically for women in the POC community or
Yeah.
whatnot, and Jordan Peterson has some things about self improvement. He goes into a lot of other things, just general society wise, that I don't think Kevin Samuels goes into. And from my experience being in the MGTOW communities, I preferred the ones who were going more to like the scientific human behavioral psychology, evolutionary psychology, just certain dynamics of group dynamics and things like that, more like sociology aspect of it. Because even at that point, I was still obese. I'm still recovering from obesity. I was realistic enough about myself. I was obese. I wasn't like I was moving between countries. I was going through some depression. So I did really consider myself to be somebody worth actually dating. So I wasn't like, oh, let me get advice on how to go like PUA, pickup artistry, always struck me as absurd. I'm like, if
Yeah.
you truly are looking for somebody, why are you setting up ways to just ask 100 women so 10 of them can actually fall for these contrived lines that you have, and then you put in this game, you're spinning plates like Rollo Tomasi says.
Yeah.
I know some of these things that we're talking about, it's like, hey, it doesn't appeal to me. That's not what I'm looking for. So I think he has some stuff on self improvement, but that's the thing. Like I think if you improve yourself and you get yourself to higher levels, that's going to raise the chance of you being in the orbit of other people who are also into improving themselves or at that level. And at the right time, you might actually get that person. It doesn't guarantee anything. Nobody's guaranteed anything. Nobody has to have something. And I think this is what part of the problems that people say, like, I must have this. I'm
Yeah.
owed this. I deserve this.
Yeah.
You don't deserve anything. You're not owed
No.
anything. You don't have to have anything
Yeah.
outside of just yourself. Yourself is the only thing you can control. So I think just improving yourself to the highest level possible that you can do in your general sphere and keep maintaining that. Realize if you meet somebody and you are at this level, it is only fair to try to maintain that level. So if you put something forward to somebody as a selling point for you, and you realize this is only something you can achieve 5% of the day, and that's your main point, chances are that person's going to get disappointed in you, because if 95% of you isn't the 5% you're leading with, they're going to find that other stuff and not find it to be as appealing. So there's certain things where I think about, it's just I think about certain things that are just rather straightforward. And I'm like, why don't people realize these things? And I
Yeah.
think Lori Gottlieb has realized some of these things, and I'm excited to see what she's going to do with this dating things. Because most of that dating things, it's things like, oh, find that 5% of you and highlight that 5%.
Yeah.
Lead with that 5%. I'm like, no, 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 no. don't lead with something that is the least you out of all you are. Like
Yeah.
dating, in my estimation, just seems to be, most of it just seems to be playing games. Like instead of being who you are, you're trying to be the person you think the person wants you to be,
Yeah.
and then that's never going to be, I think, a good basis for an actual strong, lasting relationship.
And that's one thing that Samuels really emphasizes too, because like you say, it's content for men and women. But I think a recurring theme, you've watched his show enough, you probably know, these women call in basically, how can I get a high value man? And I think one of the points he's really pushing is a lot of these women think, oh, I can just land some wealthy guy and then I can just sit at home and spend money, and it's like it's a get out of jail free card. And he's trying to emphasize, what would it do to get a man like this, and also why do you deserve that? And then even if you get a guy like that, you and I discussed off um camera yesterday, he even talks about this. Like, he's like, a lot of these wives of high value men, they work harder than most employees, like, maintaining the house, staying in shape, taking care of the kids, all this. Like, it's not, it's like, I think some of these women who think like this, they think, oh, I can just call in, I can land a guy, I can get him to indulge me, and then it's like, it's just life of luxury, easy life from here on out. And it's like, again, why are you entitled to that? And a lot of these guys are smart enough to know that that's a game some women play. And then if you're a guy who wants to have all these options, well, what can you do to warrant all these options? And I think all those are important conversations. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a weird thing. I wonder where some of that comes from, because don't these strong, independent women, some of the ones who say that, don't they
Yeah.
also understand in order to have their job, they need to put in a lot of effort to maintain
Yeah.
their position in that field that they've chosen? So why do
Yeah.
they expect relationships to be much easier? Maybe there's, like Lori Gottlieb said in some parts, and other people have said, there's that contrived idea that it's easy. The man's world is easy. It's a man's world. That James Brown song. So they think that that is just like some kind of coasting type of thing, or they think men don't put in that much effort, or I don't know what it is to come to that aspect where some of these women seem to be high achieving, seem to be accomplished. They seem to be in fields and things where they understand this competitiveness to maintain their position. They've done effort, but then when it comes to relationships, they think they can just sit back. And there is that dynamic because a lot of these women, like, yes, they've gone into the men's field, traditionally male's field, and compete on that same level. They're going after contracts. They're being a little shisty in here. This is to actually get into
Yeah.
a position and like, oh, I'm not going to tell my employees what's going on. I'm going to get some lies here. I need to push this person past their point. Yes, I know they're like upset, but I'm not going to focus, and I need to push them in order to do this. I need to take this risk. I might lose out in this contract. They do that. They're very like assertive in that sense. But then when it comes to relationship, no, I'm going to sit back. You have to ask me out. You have to open the door for me. You have to pay for everything. You have to take the lead. You have to plan all the things. I don't understand that disconnect where in their professional life, private life, in professional life, even private life, they're very up and going and active agents in they're achieving what they want to get. But when it comes to their private life, their personal sexual life, that kind of thing, they take such a passive role where they're just like an object to be moved around rather than being like the subject where they're actually moving things around. It's really a weird mentality that, and again, this comes probably down to the genetics. Maybe we just default to that situation where in order this, you're genetically wise, you're like, can I be in this situation where I
Yeah.
don't do anything? And I think part of that is they understand if you're actually gestating, if you're actually having the kid, you need to kind of understand, can this male support me if I'm not able to do anything for myself besides
Yeah.
raise our kids, besides be with our kid?
Yeah.
I think there's a part of attractiveness. So I think maybe that could be part of why females seem to default into that mentality, even though they're up and coming in other fields. I don't know.
And that's what we were discussing yesterday too. Like, I know a woman who is saying like, "Oh, how do I get a rich guy?" And she's complaining like, "Oh, men don't want to take care of their women." And it's like, I'm like, "Well, there's a rich guy. He has all these options. What is he getting for marrying you?" And she's like, "Sex." It's like, that's not some rare commodity. If this guy has all these options, he can easily pass you up for a younger, prettier woman. It's just kind of like, oh, well, I just want a guy who's going to spend all this money on me. And it's like, again, the analogy I made is like, that's like saying, hire me for this job. Why? I just want a good salary. Well, yeah, everyone wants a salary, but it's like, why should it be given to you versus everyone else? And as you said, if these women are working, it's like, you don't get paid just to show up. So it's like, why do you think you would be given a life of luxury just by virtue of your existence? Like, it doesn't make a lot of
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah, that sex thing is kind of weird.
Yeah.
I don't know. We
I
should
know.
we should
And
probably do like a separate thing on prostitution and things like that, because I'm wondering what if prostitution was just legalized all over the world,
yeah.
with the dynamics, because we already see the changes happening with pornography and
Yeah.
things like the OnlyFans type of things. That's already starting to affect the dating meta, where women are
Yeah.
starting. Some women are starting to realize, wait, this is not these. How dare these women commodify this actual aspect when,
Yeah.
in general, that is part. And those same women
Yeah.
will also say, in my transaction, I'm bringing myself to the.
Yeah.
So it's a weird
Well,
situation, but
I was saying to you, and I think I said it to someone else too. It's like a weird version of horseshoe theory, because it's like, for those who don't know, it's like things that are supposed to be the opposite but coming together. It's like, oh, feminists say men want nothing but sex, but then these women in turn offer nothing but sex, but then they become
yes,
helpless and dependent on the guy, and it's like you're becoming the very thing that you complain about and supposedly fought against and all this, and it's just like it's just it's all very disconnected for me.
yeah. Yeah, and I think with that disconnect, that's a good place to kind of end this one off, and we'll
Yep.
disconnect this part from
Uh-huh.
the next part of this. And as Stephen mentioned, this is chapter 4. We got a few more, several more chapters, several more
Yeah.
parts to go in this series. And we have also other series where we're talking about like politics, some of the stuff. We have like a series we could check where we read through like the fortification of the 2020 election. There's a lot of things coming out right now as we come close to the midterm of the United States of America. Some of the revelations coming out that some people in the media seem to be admitting to, that if you'd read that article right after the election, you'd have known about some of these things. Then we have other things on just like the food series we have is also really good. Like Dishing on Dish, you have We Consume, a lot of different content. Stephen has some conversations with other people as well. He has an Instagram. You can check out the stuff there, posting like extremist content. Um, and then we have other projects we're kind of talking about getting up and going. And yeah, I guess. Anything else you want to tell the peoples before we sign off?
No, I mean, I foreshadowed some of the stuff that's coming up, which we'll discuss more in depth. So I think this is a good place to stop. Yep.
Okay, so that's it for me, guys,
Uh,
gals, and everything else in between. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.